Our top focus story on the broadcast is the buzz in Chinese social media, especially military forums in China. After the disengagement, especially after China claimed it had lost 4 soldiers. Of course, according to the Russian agency TASS, China has lost 45 soldiers. India's assessment could well be, according to sources, anything between 45 to 60 soldiers. But China, even after losing 4 soldiers, their netizens are in a state of mourning. They're also asking some tough questions. Do Chinese soldiers lack the stomach to fight? Do they lack the will to fight? The disengagement, especially the speed of disengagement, does that indicate that China did not want to fight India? What's the writing on the Great China Wall? Antara Singh brings you a top story tonight.
The India-China standoff and disengagement is a hot topic of discussion in Chinese social media, especially on the Chinese military forum. But in the line of fire is the Chinese military leadership for ceding ground to India. Consider this debate on the military forum where it is being claimed. China has given away too much. The concession is inexplicable. The disengagement agreement is unfair and unfavorable to China.
The Chinese government officially announced the death of 4 Chinese soldiers in the Galwan Valley clash. A national mourning is happening in China. But before that, a very important and interesting discussion and debate was taking place in Chinese social media circles on China-India disengagement agreement. While some expressed satisfaction that a major crisis could be averted, others were of the opinion that China gave away too much. A peace for peace is how many people criticize this agreement.
As more details of the disengagement and Chinese withdrawal came in, commentators said that the retreat was far from equidistant and that China had retreated more than India. On Chinese army demolishing permanent defenses along the north bank of Pangong Tso, the netizens in China argued that Chinese had demolished more structures than India. Netizens in China believe that China surrendered its advantage on the north bank of Pangong Tso, and the disengagement sent out a message that China had backed down and was unwilling to fight India. The Chinese strategic community had argued that the loss of strategic initiative will erode China's power and psychological advantage over India. Some fear that China's long-term goal of strategic suppression of India, delaying India's rise, will be jeopardized. With Antara Singh, Bureau Report, India Today.
3 of the finest voices on China now join me on India First. Jaidev Ranade is former Additional Secretary of the Research and Analysis Wing. He heads a think tank on China. He joins me on India First. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash joins us for a diplomatic perspective, and Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff, with me on the broadcast. But before I come to my guests, I want to quickly cut across to Antara Singh, who brought us this report. She speaks the language. She's been looking at the net very closely. Antara, welcome on India First. Give us a sense, give us a flavor of what netizens in China have been arguing about the disengagement and about the loss of lives.
Yes, there has been lots of criticism about the agreement in China, and many people think that China gave away too much, and the retreat was not equidistant. China retreated more. China demolished more structures. China had to, China actually compromised more than India, particularly the issue of actual control. That figured quite a lot in the Chinese conversations, and they were arguing that the region from Finger 4 to Finger 8, which came under China's actual control in the last 6 months, that they had to give up as a part of this agreement, and that was making the Chinese side particularly upset about this agreement.
Okay. an important point, a very pertinent point, and let me take it to General Gurmeet Singh. General Gurmeet Singh, netizens in China argue that they had built roads, they had built defenses, they had bunkers, they had dugouts, they had communication trenches. When everything was in their control, why did they just leave it? That indicates that China gave up too much, wanting peace. So a piece of land was given away for peace. You agree, sir?
Gaurav, I would say that the bloggers and the population who is on the internet and the social media of China, they are asking sharp questions. And they are asking tough and real questions. And the reason is that China had taken the path of not disclosing anything to the citizen at all. And in fact, now they've just woken up to the aspect that they had casualty in this, and now the details are coming on to them about the casualties and other aspects of 10 months of the border standoff.
Okay.
And these questions are very natural by them. And in fact, I would say their suspicion and their speculation and their questions, I think they are absolutely right from their perspective, because they want to know that...
They're asking, is this a sign of weakness, Jaydev Ranade? Jaydev Ranade, they're asking, is this a sign of weakness? China was in control of territory between Finger 4 and Finger 8, not just patrolling, in physical control. They had their defenses set up. So there is no way they could have been evicted from there, is what they argue, and yet they gave it up. They're asking, was this a sign of weakness of the Chinese army? Your appreciation, Jaydev Ranade, since you look at China very closely, you go through what they're thinking, what they're talking, what they're discussing, sir.
Gaurav, you're quite right that they've started asking the leadership questions. It's actually also an implicit criticism of the leadership, because they're in a way suggesting that they haven't been kept informed, and that all the hype about the PLA and that China being stronger than India has not been proved. A couple of instances, let me tell you, a couple of specific points that were made. One was, they said that Finger 5 was in China's control all the way up to Finger 5. So why have we given it up? What was the reason for us to come back? The second question they ask is, how much territory have we given up? These are similar questions to what were raised after the disengagement at Doklam. But I want to invite your attention to a particular post on a social media account of a former mainland journalist, a Communist Party member, former mainland journalist, who has 2.5 million followers. So that's quite a sizable number. And he has gone on the post public the same day that China announced that they were honoring the 4+1, the 5 soldier. He said that as far as he is aware, one of the soldiers who was honored, Chief Fa Pao, who is a regimental commander from Xinjiang, should not have been honored because he did not lead his troops. That was one. The second, he says, I am aware that I know that 60 to 70 Chinese soldiers have lost their lives. What are we doing about them? This was repeated.
He's been arrested. His blog has been deleted. Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. I'm coming to that story in just a moment. But on the specific point, for the moment, I want to stay between Finger 4 and Finger 8. The Chinese are saying they were in control of Finger 5. They did not permit India to patrol beyond Finger 5. And now they had been relegated east of Finger 8. Was that a sign of weakness? Was that a display that China did not stand up to India? But Ambassador Prakash, Depsang and Demchok, they both remain a friction point even now. The Chinese still haven't gone back from Gogra and Hot Spring. So are we reading too much into what Chinese netizens are saying or criticizing their army on ground? They may have gone back from Finger 4 to 8 because we were south of Pangong Tso, but at other points, the friction points remain, sir.
Oh, absolutely, they remain, Gaurav, and I'm so compliments for raising this point. You know, it so happens that I reached Shanghai in early 2006, just months after the consulate of Japan in Shanghai was stoned, where a mob had almost brutalized the Japanese diplomats. and it was all orchestrated, all orchestrated. While a lot of discussion by the bloggers could be genuine, I will not put it beyond the Chinese to orchestrate that, although this is like playing with fire because they have to calibrate it very carefully. And to get a handle on saying that, look, this is the reaction of the general public, our hands are tied, etc., etc. But this is one possible scenario. The fact is, which my co-panelists mentioned, that there is a lot of ignorance, and the ignorance is because totalitarian regimes rest on a foundation of fear, information control,
Yes.
and oppression. And they are these are the regimes which have a Teflon coating but are very fearful of social unrest. And last point is that what the Chinese regime fears the most is not the US or anything else, but the social media, because that is something that they can have difficulty in controlling. And once the fear factor goes and information comes out, they quake.
Okay. Oh, they quake. So what would they be doing right now when netizens, and some of them anonymous, General Gurmeet Singh, are asking some tough questions? I'm staying on finger 4 to finger 8 for the moment, is because the netizens are asking, if we control this territory, why are we ceding this territory? Some of the questions they seem to ask indicates that, is there more to it than meets the eye? Is it just India being on Rizangla, Richinla, south of Pangong Tso, or does India enjoy other advantages that China and India are not putting out in public domain just as yet, but India is no longer defensive? General Gurmeet Singh.
Absolutely, Gaurav. I think the queries which the netizens of China are asking are absolutely dot on. See, they are indicating on a comparative terms. They are trying to find out for themselves that in the 10 months of border standoff, they have come out weaker. In fact, as more details come out, at the moment they only come out about the 4 casualties, but when the more number will tumble out, because what they have actually not like this, that firstly, it is being told after 8 months. Second is, number is not right. They had large amount of casualties, but they have just given the first window only of the 4. So they're getting surprised. Not specifically regarding the north bank of Pangong Tso, in between area 4 and 8. In fact, it is a China who was the first mover into this area. They are the one who unilaterally wanted to change the status quo. Now they have moved back. So they are reading more in between the lines that they moved back because they were wrong. Because India took a firm and resolved stand.
A point that you made, General Gurmeet Singh, and I want to take this to Jaydev Ranade. A point that you make is China appears weaker. Does China, Jaydev Ranade, in your opinion, actually appear weaker post disengagement? Because disengagement has happened only in a very small part of that 832 kilometer area. Gogra, Hot Spring, there is commitment for disengagement or forward movement. It hasn't happened. Depsang and Demchok, both north and south, the situation does remain grim. Even though Army Commander, Northern Command General Y.K. Joshi told me that they don't have troops amassed the way they were amassed at Pangong Tso.
Gaurav, there are 2 points here. One is, of course, what the netizens are raising, what the domestic journalists are raising in China. They're normally, at least journalists are informed people there, and they have questioned the figures. They are asking why China is pulling back. As I said, these are the same questions that were raised after Doklam, and we know that after Doklam, there was a considerable dissatisfaction inside the PLA with the decision to disengage. So here, the more difficult parts of the disengagement are yet to come. As you said, there are Depsang, Damchok, Gogra and Hot Springs. So what is going to happen there is a big question. Of course, there is always a possibility that the leadership may now say that, we have got public pressure, we can't accommodate your demands. But I don't think that's going to be the case.
Sure.
If they are clear, if they have decided to pull back, then things should go ahead. But I think this is a very delicate phase right now.
Okay.
Quite apart from the...
it indeed is.
Yeah, quite apart from that, it's a very delicate phase, which which we have
So
to
you
face.
raised the point about that blogger who's been arrested and the points that blogger had raised. And take a look at this report about the blogger in terms of the questions he raised. When the Chinese government says that only 4 people were killed, or 4 soldiers were killed and 5 have been honored, this blogger is actually raising questions about that. Qui Ziming, he's a Chinese blogger, he's a former journalist. He's been arrested for questioning the Galwan video propaganda. Chinese security agency arrested Ziming, a former journalist and very popular blogger, over 2.5 million followers, for questioning China's narrative on Galwan. He had questioned why it took China, the state, 8 months to acknowledge these deaths, though the Indian side had acknowledged the valor, the bravery and the deaths of Indian soldiers the very next day. Now, Ziming also told his 2.5 million followers on Weibo, which is China's Twitter equivalent, that the fatalities may have been much higher than 4. Another web user who targeted the PLA has been detained by the police. So in the past 3 years, more than 50 Chinese citizens have been sentenced for using platforms to express their views on issues like Hong Kong protests, Taiwan, and human rights violation in Xinjiang. Criticism of fundamentals like the Communist Party's claim to legitimacy is met with rather rigorous and severe response from the state. Antara, if I may bring you in once again, can you give us details about this blogger who's been arrested? Are others also raising similar questions, or is the state coming down with an iron hand on such elements, ma'am?
Yes, there has been some reports about people getting arrested for questioning the government casualty figures, and I think it's not very unusual. In China, it is given their system, it is very difficult to directly question the government or the authority without inviting, trouble. So that is there. But other than that, particularly in the Galwan incident, this has always been a source of controversy in China. Why did it happen? How many people got killed, and how is it going to be resolved? All these things are, people are really curious about all these things, and there is much less information in the public domain. So Chinese strategists, Chinese people have always been arguing that there should be more information available on this issue.
Okay. And especially in India, when there is so much information in public domain, the day after Galwan clashes, we were reporting from ground zero in Leh. I've been to Daulat Beg Oldie, reported from ground zero all along the DSDBO highway, including crossed Galwan days after the clash. But Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, people are asking questions about Galwan. 4 acknowledged by China so far, perhaps at least 41 still have died unsung. Will their parents not be raising questions? Will veterans from their unit, their regiment, their battalion, will they not be raising questions? And is this not a cause for concern for the Chinese military leadership, at least, if not for Xi Jinping?
It is a concern, and that is one of the reasons why they try to keep a lid on information and facts. In China, they want to have only that quote-unquote fact which is sanitized and which is given out by the government of China. But they fear, and that is where they're very vulnerable, because the entire edifice rests on falsehood. And they know that if the facts come out, tumble out, there are going to be concerns. And there are 57 million veterans in China, which in any case have difficulties, and they have been grudging and they have been complaining. The parents would certainly be concerned, but the machinery is such that it tries to suppress all voices which are not in conformity with the government's position. Last point, Gaurav, there is, in Weibo, there are 523 million active users, which is 3 times the quantity or number of Twitter. And the Chinese government knows that these are the restless youngsters who need to be given a window or a platform to let off their steam. And quite often it has happened in the past that they have been allowed for a while and then there has been a clampdown. So anything is possible in China. I will not rule in or rule out anything.
Then shouldn't India then put out information in public domain, or does it suit us not to put out information in public domain, Jal Gurmeet Singh? Because from what sources have told me on ground, that more than 4 bodies had been washed downstream the night after the Galwan clashes. A ledge gave way and several bodies were washed towards the Indian side, and they were returned with respect to China. So India for a fact knows that more than 5 Chinese soldiers were killed at Galwan, Jal Gurmeet Singh.
Absolutely, Gaurav. I personally feel that, see, long-term perspective, truth, fact and reality, they win. And in fact, there is a requirement to have just policies. And on this issue, if you see comparatively, like from Indian point of view, we have always honored a soldier when in the circumstances of supreme sacrifice. When we look around, we looked at Pakistan, what they did in Kargil. We have seen in Galwan, what did China. So I think personally, a long-term perspective on process, procedures and policies is very important. In fact, I would say that in this case, once you do a comparative study, the Chinese and the netizens are going to see it from 3 modalities. First, that was PLA as compared to Indian Army. Second is the leadership. And third is the processes. If you look at 15 June and 29th August, you find that Indian Army has shown its class in as far as the mountain warfare, combat experience, and valor is concerned. When you look at the leadership, you look at how many...
That's a very major point you make there. In fact, post that, and if I may take this point quickly to Jaidev Ranade, Chinese netizens have also been arguing in this military forum, the speed at which the Chinese soldiers pulled back. Does that indicate that they can deploy and withdraw with amazing speed and India should be aware? Or does that indicate, as the Chinese bloggers argue, that they were virtually running away from battle so that they don't have to stay there a day longer at Ladakh?
Well, that is what the Chinese bloggers say, that, the troops were in a hurry to get back to their respective homes because of the Lunar New Year festival. But the Chinese military analysts did point or give a spin, saying that the speed with which they went back in compliance, quote unquote, with the agreement also indicates the speed with which they can return in case of need. But I'd like to make a couple of points here, Gaurav, very quickly. One is, we must not forget that there is an atmosphere of fear in China, and the people don't voluntarily or don't readily flout the government's orders. So those families of martyrs were visited by public security personnel and told to keep quiet, not to have funerals, to have just private funerals. So I think by and large they would have complied. The second point I would like to make here is that those bloggers who did take to the WAPO, who did question the number of casualties that I told you, Singh said he knows that there are 60 to 70 fatalities. People like that, they know that they're running a risk because they have to give their identities, they have to give their names to the authorities if they have to have a WIPO account. So they know that they are going to be picked up, and they were. Singh was picked up on the 20th February night. 2 others have been picked up, one in Beijing and one elsewhere, also on February 20th night, for spreading, as the Chinese said, false stories. So in a way, this is also, I would put another perspective before you, this is also a questioning of the leadership's claims for having built up a strong army, of the leadership's claims to have suppressed India or kept India down, and now the people are actually asking tough questions.
Asking tough questions, saying what have they achieved, and with this disengagement, has China actually lost that advantage? But I'll come to that point in just a moment. So the 10th round of Corps Commander talks, we were told, would lead to disengagement at Gogra and Hot Spring, and forward movement at Depsang. Depsang, according to the Army Commander, Northern Command, the perception difference between India and China is maximum. Does that mean now, with such criticism that's appearing in Chinese media or in their social media, is China looking for a reason not to de-escalate at Depsang and at Demchok?
The tanks and armoured vehicles have rolled back. The standoff at Pangong Tso is over. The next prickly issue is disengagement at other friction points like Depsang, Gogra and Hot Springs. The 10th round of military talks at Moldo on the southern bank of Pangong Tso on the Chinese side began at around 10 a.m. on Saturday and ended at 2 a.m. on Sunday. A joint press statement released by India and China hoped for positive resolutions at the remaining flashpoints. Both armies agreed for more dialogue while maintaining ground tranquility.
After a 16-hour-long marathon meeting at the Moldo BPM on the Chinese side at the LAC, the Indian delegation, led by Lieutenant General PGK Menon, is back at the Leh Corps. The meeting, sources tell India today, has been fruitful. There is hope of forward movement, of disengagement at key friction points.
Both sides agreed to talk further for similar disengagements on the LAC in the western sector. They accepted that the peace and tranquility will prevail along the LAC by such communications between the two countries.
Depsang at 16,000 feet is strategically important as it provides access to India to the Daulat Beg Oldie airstrip and Karakoram Pass further north, close to China's Western Highway G219. It is in Depsang that the two armies remain mobilized at very large levels. The general overseeing the pullback in Ladakh made this official assessment of the Depsang challenge in an exclusive interview with India Today.
Currently, situation is not volatile there. There are no troops, amassed on other side like we were, sitting here on the North Bank and South Bank and Razangna Chinla. So it has been agreed as one of the friction points, and post the disengagement that is happening now, we will sit down and discuss and resolve that issue as well.
Also high on agenda is thinning of troops at Gogra and Hot Springs, where both armies are still deployed.
Both sides agreed that both sides will go back 1.5 kilometers. He is also, not coming up to his claim line. So there is a kind of buffer zone, if you may call it. But then that will get resolved. Subsequently, after these disengagement happens of the phase 1, we will be looking at each and every, friction area which are still existing, that there are issues which we will now sit down and negotiate and resolve those issues.
After the breakthrough in Pangong, there is hope that both sides will find a common ground on the other friction points. The ball now is in China's court. With Abhishek Bhalla and Gaurav Sawant, Bureau Report, India Today.
General Gurmeet Singh, it was hoped that after Pangong Tso, there would be forward movement on Gogra and Hot Spring first and Depsang and Demchok subsequently. That appears to be in a grey area, at least as of now. What is your appreciation of the situation? With this criticism in China, would China use this as delaying tactics, stalling tactics, or China now has realized that there is no way it can make advances with 50,000 Indian troops and tanks and artillery and aircraft deployed in Ladakh? So would discretion be better part of valor? Would China actually then think of going back?
Gaurav, the way the phase 1 of disengagement has gone, it was to be completed by 24th February, but it was completed before time. The way the 10th meeting has been held in a positive, progressive way, it indicates, because as compared to the north and the south bank of Pangong Tso, other areas are comparatively easy, especially when we talk about the Hot Spring and the Gogra Heights. But when we look at the Depsang, it's a legacy issue. It is predated before April 2020 event. And this is comparatively, this is the larger area of differing perception as far as Eastern Ladakh is concerned, and would need a lot of deliberation to talk about Depsang in the coming time. But I'm definite about it that China has taken a concerted decision, and they've understood that there was a mistake on this side when they went in for their action in 2020. That seems to be, but at the same time, I would say it's very difficult to trust China because what we have seen in 2020.
Oh, absolutely. No, that point taken. But would China actually be thinking, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, that this is a strategic miscalculation, their ingress in 2020, and would they actually want to now disengage from every friction point along the LAC? Because India insists that disengagement wasn't restricted to Pangong Tso. It should include Depsang and Daulat Beg and Depsang and Demchok and all the friction points.
Well, certainly, as far as we are concerned, during the 9 rounds earlier of talks and now the 10th, we have discussed all aspects of disengagement in all the sectors. There's no doubt about it. But Gaurav, all of us have been discussing it, and let me reiterate that it is very difficult to understand what goes on, fathom what goes on in the Chinese mind. Remember, this is one country which tore up 35 years of CBMs and agreements. So it all depends on their calculus. What are they thinking at the moment? How is it going to pan out on a bilateral front, on an international front, on the US position, and variety of factors. One thing I'm very sure of, I'm not sure whether or not it will happen, but I'm very sure that the discussions are going to be protracted and they will play hardball, which they have always played. If they think that the pressure on them is too much, they will relent. But we have to be very mindful that this is a country which is capable of any chickenry, any deceit.
Oh, absolutely. That we've seen. But Jaidev Ranade, would you agree that the Chinese are now saying, or at least their netizens are now saying, that the long-term strategic goal of China of keeping India suppressed, of keeping the borders undecided to ensure that India does not rise or pose a threat to China, all of that has been adversely impacted by what the Chinese did in 2020 and the disengagement in 2021?
That is what the netizens are saying, Gaurav. But as far as the Chinese leadership is concerned, a lot depends on how they calculate the result of their action. So far, what they've done is they have not achieved anything despite such a massive build-up, despite coming in here and staying on the heights for 9 months. But now, by agreeing to pull back, at least in North Pangong and South Bank of Pangong, it's one step, it's a baby step, it's a tentative step, but it's one step where they acknowledge that it will be wiser for them to pull back. Similarly, I hope the other they do the same in the other sectors, but it's too early to say. And with one, in any case, can never trust them. So one has to wait and see what happens. But here, the other factor comes in.
That's a point that all guests are making, that you cannot trust China. But if I may, so far, Indians used to think, what will China do? But after Doklam in 2017 and General Gurmeet Singh, after what the Indian Army did on the south bank of Pangong Tso on August 29th, 30th and Galwan 15 June, and of course subsequently Kila, Anila posts just north of Pangong Tso, will the Chinese now think, what will India do? I'm sure they've never factored in an aggressive Indian response in terms of having tanks on Rizangla, Richindla. They must have thought that India will perhaps roll over and play dead, but India put tanks on Rizangla, Richindla. Will the Chinese now think or factor in their military moves, what will India do next?
Gaurav, you are taught on. Chinese will have to review, rethink, and recalculate and reorient. They'll have to do it because now they've seen for themselves. They will learn, I don't know how many lessons out of 5th May, 15 June and 29 August. And from what the ecosystem or what the leadership and what the trend and the direction India has taken. And Gaurav, I would also like to highlight, I think biggest change has got to be in Indians on our own self-worth. What Indian soldier, what Indian security forces, what Indian leadership, and what every citizen has done, being absolutely in jointness and oneness in taking on the challenge of China. I think this is the threshold which has been crossed. We are across the threshold, and this is what the stand of India is thereafter.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, would you agree with this assessment that this is an India which is proactive? This is an India which not only takes military measures and countermeasures, does not fight defensive. This is on an offensive. You're not only at one point of time overlooking their Moldo garrison, you're also overlooking some other sensitive locations in China. It may not be in public domain, but China knows that it is as vulnerable, which probably it never thought in the past. And other than military measures, the economic measures that government of India has taken, banning Chinese apps, getting the world together, strengthening Quad, what signal is this sending out to China, sir?
Gaurav, you're spot on. Let me just read out a line from what Ambassador Shyam Saran said recently. And I slightly paraphrasing him, but what he said was, China may have miscalculated that its aggression would be a low cost or low risk operation, and they were surprised that Indian troops held their ground. Not only Indian troops held their ground, but surprised the Chinese, and the reason being, which our military personnel have publicly stated, Government of India gave them a free hand. Government of India said, do what it takes to not only protect the country, but to give a befitting reply to the adversary. For once, the entire leadership in the country, diplomatic, military, political, is on the same page, which has rarely happened. And certainly this is a different India. China will factor that in. China, I'm not given to thumping my chest, but India is not a pushover, and that is at least one factor that the Chinese will have to take into account if they are planning a future misadventure.
Okay, Jaidev Ranade, you agree with this assessment? Ambassador Vishnu Prakash says whether it was Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying Sena ko khuli chhoot di hai, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, saying that as long as the army is there, the country is protected. The army being aggressive at Galwan. You saw that valor, that steely determination in the eyes of that young lieutenant of the Bihar regiment who's staring the adversary down. Will China factor that in, that this is a new India, and it's not just military steps, economic steps, political steps, the entire nation in one voice saying expansionist forces beware?
Basically, what the Chinese have now seen is a very strong political and military resolve to stand up to China and not yield even an inch. I think that the Chinese have seen, they probably didn't anticipate it. They thought that we would yield ground. And now they will go back and study a number of lessons that they would have got from this. What is surprising, however, is that a similar thing happened at Doklam for 73 days, and they don't seem to have learned a lesson from there. But here they have learned a lesson. And if I may add, while we are saying that we did take certain offensive action at Galwan, certainly, and where we were outnumbered heavily, and also on the Blacktop, etc., at the Kailash range. I think what would be worrying for the Chinese also is whether we plan to do something else, which means an ingress into their territory, where they also would be vulnerable. Because what does come out here for them is that India was not carved down by the massing of Chinese troops along the borders. And I think that's a signal lesson for them. So these are the factors that they're going to look at.
It indeed is. I will let that be the last word on the show. The Chinese believe in Sun Tzu. Perhaps they're now realizing that India believes in Chanakya Niti. And Chanakya Niti so far has been extremely effective on ground. Let's listen in to Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he talks about why it's so important for India to be Atmanirbhar in defense. Why private sector needs to step in and play a much bigger role, because protecting our national interest is the responsibility of every Indian. Let's listen in.
एक समय था जब हमारे अपने लड़ाकू विमान तेजस को फाइलों में बंद करने की नौबत आ गई थी। लेकिन हमारी सरकार ने अपने इंजीनियरों, वैज्ञानिकों और तेजस की क्षमताओं पर भरोसा किया और आज तेजस शान से आसमान में उड़ान भर रहा है। कुछ सप्ताह पहले ही तेजस के लिए 48,000 करोड़ रुपए का ऑर्डर दिया गया है। कितने एमएसएमई सेक्टर जो इसके साथ जुड़ेंगे, कितना बड़ा कारोबार होगा। साथियों, हथियार और मिलिट्री इक्विपमेंट बनाने का भारत के पास सदियों पुराना अनुभव है। आजादी के पहले हमारे यहां सैकड़ों ऑर्डिनेंस फैक्ट्रियां होती थी। दोनों विश्व युद्धों में भारत से बड़े पैमाने पर हथियार बनाकर भेजे गए थे, लेकिन आजादी के बाद अनेक वजहों से इस व्यवस्था को उतना मजबूत नहीं किया गया जितना किया जाना चाहिए था। इस बैठक में आप सभी को ये भरोसा देता हूं कि डिफेंस सेक्टर से जुड़ा हर वो सामान जिसे डिजाइन करने, जिसे बनाने का सामर्थ्य देश में है, किसी सरकारी या प्राइवेट कंपनी में है, वो बाहर से लाने की अप्रोच नहीं रखी जाएगी। 40 से ज्यादा देशों को डिफेंस का सामान निर्यात कर रहे हैं। इंपोर्ट पर निर्भर देश की पहचान से बाहर निकलकर हमें दुनिया के अग्रणी डिफेंस एक्सपोर्टर के रूप में अपनी पहचान बनानी है और आपको साथ लेकर के इस पहचान को मजबूत करना है।
The public sector, the private sector need to come together to take the country forward. Be Atmanirbhar in defense. Instead of being a net importer of weapons and systems, be an exporter is the Prime Minister's message. We will discuss this in the days and weeks ahead. But for the moment, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Jaidev Ranade and General Gurmeet Singh, as always, a pleasure to listen to you and have you on India First. Thank you very much for joining me. A quick break. We'll shift focus. We'll go to some of the other big political stories of the day on the other side of these messages. Keep watching India Today.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.